Number 10. DIY burn. In 2021, Abby Quinnen, a dancer and TV personality, sustained third-degree burns after attempting to repurpose a glass bottle into a pretty vase. Abby was copying a DIY demonstration tutorial from YouTube. She was trying to cut a wine bottle in half using fire when the glass bottle exploded and she was engulfed in flames. The DIY project involved dipping a rope in a flammable substance, wrapping it around a wine bottle, and then lighting the rope on fire. The flaming rope is supposed to cut the wine bottle in half perfectly, but in Abby's case, the bottle shattered and she went up in flames. Fortunately for Abby, her boyfriend AJ Pritchard acted quickly after the fire started. He sprung into action, using a damp tea towel to put out the flames and dialed 911. All the hair on her head was burned off. She also needed 3 skin grafts, and she was stuck in the hospital for 7 weeks. Almost all of her body was covered in bandages from the third-degree burns. After the accident, Quinnen took to Instagram and made a post in which she warned people to be extremely cautious when replicating YouTube videos. Number 9. The TikTok Freckles. Tilly Whitfield, a Big Brother contestant from Australia, was already a good-looking girl when she made the mistake of trying out some DIY freckles. What could go wrong? The 21-year-old was scrolling through TikTok one day when she came across a beauty hack, which involved a user giving themselves freckles with a sewing needle and ink. The freckles were meant to fade within 6 months, so Tilly thought it was a cute idea and decided to hop on the trend. She purchased some brown tattoo ink online, not really knowing if it was the right ink because the video did not specify what type of ink to get. And then she pricked her face all around the nose and cheek area, and her face soon began to burn. Tilly quickly discovered that the ink was a counterfeit product made with high levels of lead, which caused a reaction. The photos she shared are horrendous, but how she described her initial reaction is even worse. Quote, "I ended up in hospital with temporary loss of vision in my eye due to swelling and was very sick from the infection. Not to mention my face was somewhat unrecognizable." End quote. During her time on the Big Brother show, she swapped between wearing a face mask or makeup at all times just to conceal what ended up looking like rashes or hives on her face. Hopefully she learned her lesson. Let this be a reminder to always leave the needles in your face kind of procedures to a trained professional. Number 8. Woodworking. Natasha Baggett, a mother of 5, had a horrifying woodworking accident that resulted in 2 of her fingers being separated from her hand. Of course, she didn't do this on purpose. It was all because of a DIY woodworking accident. Natasha is a devoted member of the quote, Buy Nothing Facebook group. In May of 2019, someone asked her if she could make a laptop table for a woman's disabled son in a wheelchair. Natasha happily agreed and started the project right away. She had just 1 slice to go when the saw she was using kicked back and sent the piece of wood flying through the air. When the wood came down, it landed on her right hand. The force of the landing pushed her hand directly into the rotating saw, which cut off her index finger completely and most of her middle finger. Her middle finger was barely hanging on by a slim piece of bone, plus the top part of her thumb was sliced clean off. Panicking, Natasha tried desperately to grab her phone and call for help, but because her hand was bleeding so badly, she couldn't do it. It took her 5 minutes just to call herself an ambulance, then another 30 minutes for the ambulance to get there. In the meantime, she tried to squeeze her hand hard enough to stop the bleeding. After all that time, it was too late for the doctors to reattach her fingers, so Natasha ended up getting prosthetic ones. She had to learn how to do everyday tasks like simply holding her coffee mug all over again. Number 7. DIY sex change. Christopher Hunnessett was sent to jail for killing Reverend Ronald Glazebook. He was found guilty of murder in 2002 after jurors heard about how the 81-year-old man was drowned in his bathtub before his body was cut into pieces and then buried in East Sussex, England. But here's where things get really weird. The conviction was overturned in 2010 when Christopher alleged that he had been sexually abused by the Reverend. The jury acquitted the charges and Christopher was allowed to go free. By this time, Christopher was no longer Christopher. He had given himself a DIY transgender operation in which he chopped off his boy parts to turn himself into a girl named Crystal. 4 months after her release, she was caught killing a man named Peter Brick, who was wrongly accused of being a pedophile. The biggest issue here is that Crystal Hunnestead was released from prison before, and nobody thought to monitor her. She drowned and dismembered an elder vicar and then was allowed to walk free. Within 4 short months of freedom, Crystal tracked down Peter Brick based on an unfounded rumor of him abusing kids and beat him all over his head with a hammer until he was dead. Crystal has now been given a life sentence, and considering her track record, she probably won't be released again. Number 6. Body Mod. Tors Reynolds from Colchester in Essex is a body piercer who cut off her own finger on purpose. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard that correctly. To celebrate the 1-year anniversary of cutting off her finger, she turned the severed digit into a DIY pendant and then decorated her stump with a tiny hat. She literally made her severed finger into a necklace. According to her, the necklace looks cute. But let's get back to the beginning. She chopped her pinky finger off after one of her friends did the same thing. It's like that old saying, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? The answer in Tor's case was yes. Without fear, she chopped off her own finger. She then stuck the severed piece of her pinky in the freezer on a bag of frozen peas, where she forgot about it for nearly a year. Who forgets about something like that? After a year came around, she bought herself a glass vial, filled it with a solution of alcohol, and put her pinky finger inside of it. She then attached a chain to the lid so that she can wear it around her neck. Apparently, this is the newest and most extreme form of DIY body modification. Forget about getting tattoos and piercings. People are now chopping off their body parts and making them into necklaces. Ew, would you rather cut off your own finger and wear it as a necklace, or lose all feeling in one of your arms? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. Gorilla Glue. Tessica Brown became a global sensation in January 2021 for a DIY trick she performed that went about as poorly as humanly imaginable. The 40-year-old daycare owner decided to gel down her hair in a long braided ponytail. Brown liked to use Got to Be Glued blasting freeze spray to hold her long braided ponytail in place, but when she ran out unexpectedly, she figured she'd just improvise and devise an at-home hack and sprayed Gorilla Glue all over her hair. It did not go as planned. Brown's ponytail became stuck in the same place. She was forced to wear her ponytail hairstyle for over a month, frozen in place and fearing for the worst. She had accidentally created what can only be described as a helmet on her scalp. In her viral TikTok video, she clicks her nails against her scalp, making a sound like a marble countertop. Brown went to the hospital for assistance, but doctors were unable to remove the glue. It wasn't until Dr. Michael Obang, a plastic surgeon, decided he was going to dedicate his time to her and performed an experimental surgery of his own invention to liberate her scalp from the polyurethane-based adhesive. She has since recovered from the procedure, but she'll probably never recover from the embarrassment. Number 4. Dropout. In 2012, an innovative young man in India built himself a helicopter from scratch. His name was Ibrahim, a high school dropout, but just because he didn't finish high school didn't mean that he wasn't as smart. Using nothing except YouTube videos, he put together a helicopter with a Maruti 800 engine, with the body built from the steel and aluminum pipes he found. But here's where the DIY project went terribly wrong. One night in August, when the 24-year-old was finally ready to fly his makeshift helicopter, he was killed. His friends had gathered around to witness his first flight. Everyone in the village was extremely proud of Ibrahim, and things were looking up for the guy. He started the engine, the rotors began spinning, and then the blades from the tail rotors snapped. A piece of the blade went flying at extremely high speed and hit Ibrahim, slicing his neck open. Even though the villagers took him to the hospital, it was too late. He bled to death before the doctors could even try to save him. Number 3. BIOHACKER. The CEO of a biomedical startup company had a bit of a herpes problem. It's not that surprising, actually. Around a quarter of the people in the US suffer from this unfortunate virus. There's no cure, and there are only a few mildly effective treatments. CEO Aaron Trawick was proud of himself when he thought that he had biohacked his very own treatment that would be the world's first cure. In 2018, in front of a live audience, he injected himself with an untested treatment to try and cure his herpes. As gene therapy becomes widely available, people, especially intelligent people with money and access to a lab, are able to create their own DIY vaccines and experiment on themselves. If it sounds risky, that's because it is. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know if his treatment worked because Aaron Trawick was discovered dead in a flotation tank. Flotation tanks are soundproof pods filled with salt water to give the user a sensory deprivation experience. However, Aaron's sensory deprivation went a little overboard because he died while inside the tank, depriving himself of ever sensing anything ever again. We don't know if this had anything to do with the makeshift vaccine, but either way, Aaron is no longer with us. Number 2, Impaled. In 2021, after a freaky DIY accident, a man named Jordan Shepard was left with 2 rusty nails and a 4-foot or just over 1.2 meter long piece of wood impaled through his leg. Jordan was taking down a shed with his partner Nicole to prepare for a bonfire party. As he was disassembling the shed, a DIY demolition project that would have been better suited to a professional, he made a grave mistake. He hit the shed too hard and a piece came flying out and pierced his leg. Jordan had to call for an ambulance, but because this was during the pandemic, the ambulance could have taken up to 6 hours to get to him. His only option was to have firefighters saw through the piece of wood so that his girlfriend could take him to the hospital. When they got to the hospital, doctors had to remove the nails from his leg, followed by some tetanus shots to make sure he didn't have an infection from the rusty nails. He broke 3 bones in his foot from the tumble he took, and now he'll have a gnarly scar on his leg for the rest of his life. Number 1, Exploding Toilet. Our next story comes from a user of Reader's Digest who describes their ingenious solution to a particularly clogged toilet. Their son's plastic potty training accessory had become firmly lodged in the toilet. To their credit, the reader came up with a novel solution: to burn it out. They triumphantly removed the toilet, carried it outside, put lighter fluid down the trap, and set it ablaze. Standing back, they write of how they reveled in the glory of the geyser of flames and their incredible ingenuity. That is, until it blew up. Yes, another explosion. An explosion in the toilet. Their story concludes simply, quote, "I bought a new toilet." End quote. Number 8, Marissa Williams. Patra Williams of Alabama took in her 19-year-old niece Marissa in April of 2014, but their relationship quickly deteriorated. The youngster saw her aunt as overbearing, while Patra was irritated by Marissa's persistent online flirting with older men and inviting them to the home she lived in with her son and fiancé. To deal with her niece, Patra made a Facebook identity of Trey Top Dog Ellis and began communicating with Marissa in an attempt to monitor the teenager's activities. The woman successfully catfished her niece, but she later admitted that the experience revealed far more than she could have imagined. As soon as Marissa began communicating with Top Dog, she started expressing to him how much she despised her aunt, and at one point even suggested she and Ellis have sex in Patra's bedroom while she slept. This escalated to the point that one day Marissa urged Ellis to kidnap her and to kill her aunt in the process. Ignorant as she was that they were the same person, this occurred after an intense fight in which Patra had refused to allow the girl to go out at an unusual hour. Marissa described in detail how he could gain access to her aunt's bedroom and proposed that if Ellis encountered resistance, he should also kill Patra's fiancé, son, and the family dog. Patra began to worry about her family's safety as a result of Marissa's specific instructions, and the fact that she began packing up all of her possessions. She dialed 911 and Marissa was arrested, astonished to discover that her aunt was the same person she'd tried to hire as a hitman. Marissa was charged with solicitation of murder and put in county jail on $30,000 bond. But in another twist, she escaped while on probation and has been on the run ever since. Number 7. DARIN SCHILMILLER. 5 teens from Alaska have been charged with killing one of their best friends after being catfished online by a stranger from Indiana who promised them $9 million to film the murder. DARIN SCHILMILLER, 21, posed as millionaire Tyler in an online chat in which he offered 18-year-old Denali Bremer a big payday to, quote, sexually assault and murder someone in Alaska. Bremer got 4 of her friends to join in and set their target as 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman, whom Bremer had once called her best friend. On June 2, 2019, the group lured Hoffman to Thunderbird Falls in Chujiak under the guise of a friendly hike. It was there that they duct-taped her hands, feet, and mouth and shot her in the back of the head with a 9mm handgun. According to documents citing digital evidence and statements, the teenagers sent numerous Snapchat videos and photos to Schilmiller as proof. The teens tried to burn Hoffman's body before pushing it into the Eklutna River, before sending text messages to Hoffman's family saying that she had been dropped off somewhere else. The day after the murder, Schilmiller allegedly blackmailed Bremer into sexually assaulting young girls. After that, she was arrested on those allegations and pictures were found on her phone linking her to Hoffman's murder. Bremer was arrested alongside Schilmiller and other conspirators, and each of them faced life in jail. Their cases have been postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, hence, no penalty has yet to be pronounced. Number 6. Jerry Smith. On June 1, 2021, police arrived at the apartment of Jerry Smith, a 40-year-old restaurant project manager, for a wellness check. Inside, they discovered Smith's lifeless body, bruised and beaten. Smith had pretended to be a woman named Angie on Tinder, and in April he partnered with 18-year-old Issamem David Alute, a freshman in Virginia Tech who was a member of the school's prestigious football team. The duo met at Smith's residence in Blacksburg, where they engaged in physical intimacy in complete darkness, and with Smith disguising his face, allegedly preventing Atute from realizing his companion was a biological man. On May 31st, Atute returned to Smith's house, realizing Smith was actually a man. Atute, enraged by the catfish, attacked Smith brutally, hitting him in the head 5 times. Smith collapsed to the ground, but Atute kept beating him. He stomped on Smith's skull, smashing all of his facial bones and knocking out several of his teeth. He then fled the scene, leaving Smith to die on his apartment floor. Atute later told detectives that he had left the apartment and did not contact 911 despite hearing bubbling and gurgling sounds coming from the victim. The next day, authorities discovered Smith's heavily beaten body, and Atute was charged with second-degree murder after confessing during questioning. He was released from prison after posting $75,000 bond. He's currently residing at his parents' house, where he is compelled to wear an electronic ankle monitor while awaiting the court's hearing later this year. Number 5. CAMILA ZEIDAN. After her internet boyfriend abandoned their relationship, a 20-year-old Australian woman jumped off of a cliff in Sydney's east in 2013. Her name was Renee Martin. She died when she left from the cliff. She did it because her heart was broken, caused by a catfishing plot planned by her former closest friend, CAMILA ZEIDAN. CAMILA had used the Facebook images of a young man she'd met at a nightclub and created the persona of Braden Spidieri, under which she began communicating with Marsden online. Braden said he couldn't be visited because he was being held and confined at the Goulburn Correctional Facility after being convicted of manslaughter in the death of a friend in a car accident. Renee and Camila's friendship had begun to erode as their romance deepened. Camila's preoccupation with the former had become clear to her friends and family, with claims of stalking and physical altercations. Renee began to drift away from Camila as her relationship with Braden developed, not knowing that they were the same person. Prosecutors would subsequently claim that after Renee broke free from the controlling real-life friendship, Camila punished her by ripping the imaginary Braden away from her. Renee received a breakup message from the man she loved and been chatting for over a year on the 5th of August, the day she died. As a result, she jumped from the cliff, and her body was never found. The authorities initiated an investigation into her death, and the link between Camila and Braden was discovered. Her house was raided, but the phone she used in the catfishing scheme was not found. Camila later stated that she and Renee were actually in a romantic relationship, and that, fearing rejection from others, they created Braden together in order to freely interact through the profile. But Renee was not aware of Braden's true identity, according to evidence and witness testimony. Despite her obvious guilt, Camila was never convicted since there are no laws in Australia prohibiting catfishing among adults. Number 4. Susannah Birch. 27-year-old Susannah Birch had spent 12 long years in an online relationship with someone she had never met in person. She met a guy who called himself Richard in a chat room when she was only 15 years old. He claimed that he was 17 and that he lived in another part of the state roughly 8 hours away. The two quickly hit it off based on their shared interest and daily spent hours at time sending each other messages. But there were certain things about Richard that didn't add up. He never video chatted with Susannah, and his promises to meet up with his online girlfriend never came to fruition. He told her that his parents were overprotective, and for years, it was a believable excuse. The couple continued their long-distance romance and even got engaged when Susannah turned 18. 9 more years of breaking up, getting back together, and frequent arguments went by before Susannah saw the TV show Catfish and decided that she deserved some answers about the man she'd been involved with for nearly half her life. Susannah had honestly suspected for years that Richard wasn't being completely honest with her, and she was finally ready to face the issue. She sought the help of a service that specializes in identifying catfishes. The hired investigators quickly connected Richard's information to a Facebook account belonging to 60-year-old man named Patrick, who was also married. The next time he called, Susannah confronted him. At first, Patrick denied the catfishing, but he realized that he had dug himself into a hole too deep to get out of, with more excuses, and simply told Susannah, in his own words, that it just grew and grew out of control. He then unloaded to her about his drinking and marital problems, which made Susannah feel guilty. Realizing she was being manipulated once again, she said goodbye to Patrick for the last time, hung up the phone, and finally moved on with her life. Would you ever stay in an online relationship without meeting them or video chatting for this long? Do you know anybody that has? Tell us about it in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 3. Jake Davison. Jake Davison carried out the first fatal mass shooting in the United Kingdom in over a decade on August 12, 2021 in Plymouth, England. Davis was a 22-year-old apprentice crane operator for a security and defense company. Davison had been suffering with mental health challenges for most of his life, ones that his family struggled to help him with. He began to form opinions that align with the incel or involuntary celibate internet subculture. They've been described as groupings of people, mostly men, who define themselves as unable to find a spouse despite desiring one, and who generally express hatred towards others who are romantically active, mainly women. Several organizations have designated incels as hate groups, and they have been linked to at least 8 mass murders since 2014. Davison's connection with his mother was strained by his anti-woman attitudes, and he resented her for continually attempting to get him help with his mental health. On August 12th, an argument erupted at their home on Biddick Drive in the Kiem neighborhood. Davison killed his 51-year-old mother before wandering the streets armed with a pump-action shotgun, which evidence suggested had been legally obtained. On Biddick Drive, he killed 2 more individuals and injured 2 more before killing a man in a nearby park. Davis then walked to Henderson Place, where he fatally injured a 66-year-old woman while reassuring a passing resident not to worry. According to witnesses, he held his shotgun like a soldier and patrolled the streets with a blank expression. He then turned the firearm on himself at 6:23 p.m. and took his own life. Local authorities have not determined a specific motivation. However, it was reported in the aftermath of the tragedy that a catfishing scam may have triggered Davison's rampage. He allegedly told his friends that he'd found, quote, the one online and that she was a gym instructor from the United States. Davison had been conversing with her every night, but she had requested money to fly to the UK to visit him. Davison's prospective lover then stopped talking to him because he didn't have the money she requested. The experience strengthened his misogynistic beliefs once he'd realized he'd been catfished, leading up to the conflict with his mother and the mass massacre. Number 2. Jennifer DAIGNAULT. Jennifer DAIGNAULT worked as a state trooper in New York before being put on probation in January 2022 for catfishing and blackmailing another woman. The 34-year-old trooper had been impersonating a man on the internet and had a text-only relationship with a 33-year-old Nassau County woman. She met the woman on a dating website, and their juicy relationship lasted from May to July of 2018. According to reports, the victim emailed DAIGNAULT multiple naked photos of herself, which DAIGNAULT then used to blackmail the victim. DAIGNAULT threatened to post the intimate images on the internet unless the victim traveled to New York City to obtain a fake ID for her. It's unknown what the ID would be used for. DAIGNAULT was arrested on September 13, 2018, following an inquiry. She was charged with a misdemeanor and third-degree coercion. DAIGNAULT had already been prosecuted in the city of Rome for a similar act, when Rome police discovered DAIGNAULT inventing many distinct online identities between November 2016 and May 2018 and using them to harass a lady in the area. She was basically a professional catfish at this point. The victim also provided intimate material to DAIGNAULT, who had threatened to post the pictures on the internet if the victim ever stopped talking with her. In a statement to authorities, the victim stated that she and DAIGNAULT both graduated from Rome Free Academy in 2005. She added that prior to this, in 2003, 2003, she began conversing on the internet with a man who claimed to be named Michael. She went on to describe how the relationship became increasingly abusive over time, and how Michael tormented her for a total of 15 years, a period she described as nothing short of a nightmare. The case out of Rome was ultimately dismissed and sealed, but the charges stemming out of Long Island stuck. DAIGNAULT resigned from her job earlier this year, being forced to surrender her badge, and she was sentenced to 3 years of probation. Number 1. DEONTE HICKS. DEONTE HICKS, a Dallas resident, traveled from his hometown to Houston in May 2020 to meet a woman he'd met online. On May 10th, he was waiting for his date outside his car on the block of Center Parkway. It was there that the 27-year-old was shot and robbed. His family believes the incident was the culmination of a catfishing scheme devised by the criminals in order to entice Hicks to the location. 2 unnamed suspects were seen fleeing the crime scene on foot in an unknown direction. The victim, a father of 1, was taken to a nearby hospital and died as a result of his injuries. No arrests have been made in connection with his death, and the family traveled to Houston in the aftermath to distribute flyers. They intended to generate new leads for local law enforcement, who they felt had done an insufficient job to bring Hicks' killer to justice. Number 10. Drill Disaster. In September 2019, 25-year-old Anna Maluchek clocked in for work at a metal parts factory in West Midlands, England. It was a pretty normal day for the most part, but things took a horrific turn a couple hours into her shift. Anna lost focus thanks to the loud noises the machines around her were making, and in the midst of the hustle and bustle of the factory, she didn't realize her hair, which was tied in a ponytail, had started to wrap itself around a rotating drill. By the time Anna realized what was even happening, it was too late. Her hair was completely stuck inside the machine, and as she cried out for help, no one responded since the factory was just that loud. In a final, desperate attempt at escaping, the 25-year-old grabbed her ponytail and tried to literally rip her hair out. At this point, she didn't care about damaging it, she simply wanted it to get out, but the force of the machine was too strong and Anna didn't have enough strength. Eventually, the drill started to pull not only Anna's hair, but her entire scalp too. Anna said that she had to listen in horror helplessly to the sound of her skin getting ripped from her scalp. It didn't take long for her to pass out, but miraculously, she made it out of the machine alive. After the incident, Anna had to go through 9 separate surgeries and even had to get her right ear amputated. The factory was fined over £62,000 for endangering Anna, but the victim herself didn't get a penny. Number 9. Hole in the Skull. Early one morning on May 6, 2018, 38-year-old Brenda McLaughlin was found lying unconscious on the side of the road in Tyrone, Northern Ireland, with a blood pool around her head. The police that found her took her to a nearby hospital where Brenda slowly recovered and explained the gruesome details of what had happened to her. Earlier that day at 2 a.m., Brenda had been partying in a nightclub called Ruby's, which was popular among the town's LGBTQ+ community. Brenda, who was also a part of this group, was violently attacked by a teenage boy as he walked outside the club to get some fresh air. She claimed that the boy used a cordless drill to strike her, putting a bloody hole in her head. Brenda also said that he was likely very homophobic. Soon after the attack, the victim started having seizures and popping in and out of consciousness, all while nobody bothered to help her. Closed-circuit television footage from before the victim was found showed the accused holding the drill and playing around with it as if it were a gun. The police eventually arrested a 17-year-old boy a short distance from the club just a few hours later. The unnamed juvenile was charged with having an offensive weapon, causing grievous bodily harm to Brenda, and stealing a power drill owned by the nightclub, but he denied being homophobic. Since the accused was just a juvenile, no further details were released to the public. Number 8. Bad Hair Day. In February 2021, Umida Nazarova, a 21-year-old woman from Borisov, Belarus, was at a Svarmet factory applying for a job opening. Nazarova was 7 weeks pregnant at the time and was desperate to get a job to pay for her child's future well-being. The factory mainly produced wires and electrodes, and for the most part, Nazarova's interview went off without a hitch. She was offered a tour of the factory before her first shift, which she gladly accepted, but this was where things started to go downhill for the young woman. Since Nazarova was only on a tour of the factory, she wasn't wearing any of the proper protective gear. After getting close to one of the machines to get a better view of how it worked, the woman's long brown hair suddenly got caught in the cogs, leaving her trapped and unable to escape. To make things worse, the employee giving Nazarova the tour door had stepped away for a minute to make a note of something, but as soon as she turned around to attend to Nazarova, the young woman was already lying on the floor lifeless. According to reports, the woman's hair was completely tangled up in the machine, and she may have suffered critical damage to her skull. By the time the ambulance got to the scene, 21-year-old Umida Nazarova was dead. The factory worker who gave the tour was given an undisclosed sentence by the Belarusian police for, quote, failing to fulfill her official duties due to the dishonest and negligent attitude and causing the death of a person. The victim's mother told the media that she simply, quote, wanted to celebrate her wedding and collect a grandson or granddaughter from the hospital. Not this. This is not what I wanted for my child. This job interview turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Number 7. Chainsaw Murder. On June 21, 2018, 29-year-old Maria Jimenez Rodriguez went missing after failing to pick up her daughter, 4-year-old Destiny Jimenez, from their neighbor's house. Shortly before her disappearance, Maria had texted her sister, Gloria Jimenez, saying she was getting chased by 3, quote, white or Hispanic men. This was the last time anyone would hear from her. But Gloria doesn't believe it was actually Maria that sent the text. According to her, the person who chatted with her on the phone referred to Maria's daughter as Des, which was a nickname the missing woman never used, not once. Instead, this name was often used by Maria's boyfriend, 47-year-old Eric Fardell Arsenault. Gloria also said that her sister would have likely called 911 instead of her if she was actually in trouble and had access to a cell phone. Arsenault, the boyfriend, claimed that he hadn't seen Maria since the day before the incident. The man had a history of violent acts, felony convictions, and had even been accused by his grown daughter from a previous relationship of child abuse. Police soon started to gather evidence while treating Arsenault as the prime suspect. They managed to find closed-circuit television footage of Arsenault entering a Home Depot to buy a chainsaw. Phone data showed both Arsenault and Jimenez together in the suspect's home the day she disappeared. Police were now certain that Arsenault had used the chainsaw to dismember his girlfriend and hide her body. But once police obtained an arrest warrant for Arsenault, who up until then claimed to be innocent, the man had already fled town. As of 2022, neither the remains of Maria Jimenez nor the whereabouts of her boyfriend and likely murderer Eric Arsenault are known. There is currently a $5,000 reward for any pertinent information that could lead to his arrest. Have you ever used a chainsaw? Tell us about it in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Hammer Karen. In June 2020, LA resident Eddie Perez, who was on vacation in Miami at the time, got a video on his phone from his home showing a girl next to his car. The video showed a middle-aged woman named Susan telling 2 men placed behind the camera to, quote, get the F out of her neighborhood. The men recording, who happened to be Hispanic, were also told to, quote, go back to Mexico. As the woman continued to blurt out racial orders and insults at the men, she began smashing Perez's parked car with a hammer. Another video showed the same person getting into a fight with yet another woman over a garden hose. The man whose car was smashed later put the videos up on his Twitter account, saying he was just trying to enjoy his vacation, but an old racist woman had to smash up his car with a hammer. According to reports, the woman was arrested by the LAPD over property damage on June 10, 2020, but just 1 day later, she was released thanks to the high risk of COVID in jail. Police did not continue pursuing the case after this, but Eddie Perez started a GoFundMe to help pay for his vehicle's repairs. He received over $11,000 from kind strangers since the damages were not covered by his insurance. Number 5. Nail Gun. In October 2009, 27-year-old Chen Liu went missing in Sydney, Australia. Liu was an immigrant who moved to Australia from China for the chance at a better life back in 2000. Almost a month after his disappearance on November 1st, 2009, his body was found by 2 young boys in a body of water near Sydney's Moorshead Drive. Liu's remains were wrapped using plastic, wires, and even an extension cord. Despite being far away from him, the boys could smell Liu's decomposing body from a distance. They told their parents the horrific news and quickly called the police. Once authorities retrieved and identified the body, they conducted an autopsy. Inspector Newham of the Sydney Police said that Liu's skull had numerous nails in it. There were a total of 37 stuck inside his head, leading police to believe that the literal nail gun might be the murder weapon used. As of 2022, this murder case remains unsolved, and the Sydney Police have failed to make even a single arrest related to Liu's murder. It's unlikely that this murder case is high on their priority list anymore, so it's probable that the case will never get solved unless the murderer themselves confesses. Number 4, nurse with a screwdriver. On March 4th, 2017, a Coachella Valley woman named Tiger Jackson had just recently broken off her 7-month-long relationship with 31-year-old ex-nurse Eric Maciel. Their connection was abusive, and Jackson decided that she wasn't going to put up with Maciel's antics anymore. That day, she decided to visit his home one last time with a friend to pack up the rest of her belongings. But as soon as Jackson got there, she was immediately greeted by her ex standing in the doorway. He tried to convince her not to leave, but once he was so sure she wouldn't change her mind, he pulled out a screwdriver and mercilessly stabbed Jackson over and over again. Maciel then turned toward Jackson's friend and went after her too, but this gave Jackson the opportunity to escape to the backyard. But before she could even leave the house, she was grabbed by Maciel once again. This time, she was stabbed in the throat as well. The attack was thankfully stopped by a mailman outside who heard the commotion and climbed onto the attacker's back to subdue him. Over half of Jackson's face was paralyzed, and she received many other injuries. Luckily, both she and her friend survived, and Eric Maciel was arrested not long after. He was convicted of 2 counts of attempted voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to life in prison with a slim possibility of parole. Number 3, home invasion with a drill. In February 2019, an unnamed man was asleep at his home in Winnipeg, Canada, when the house was suddenly invaded by 4 burglars. Once they noticed the man had woken up due to the noise, 2 of the invaders, 32-year-old Richard Thomas Ponyting and 31-year-old Connie Mitchell Williams, attacked him with a power drill they had stolen from him. The homeowner was able to block the initial attack, but it injured his upper body. After that, one of the suspects came at the man again and left him in a critical state. While he was passed out, the thieves managed to escape after stealing a few valuables. Ponyting and Williams were later arrested by the Winnipeg police the day after and charged with breaking and entering to commit a robbery and aggravated assault. The other 2 invaders remain at large. Number 2, unfortunate accident. In September 2019, ambulances rushed to a factory in New South Wales, Australia to respond to one of the most gruesome workplace accidents in the state's history. That day, an unnamed 18-year-old man was just working at the factory on the outskirts of Sydney, but somewhere along the line, his loose pants got stuck inside a conveyor belt. As he desperately tried to free himself, he only wound up closer and closer to the industrial machine, all while no one was there to hear his cries for help. Eventually, not only did the man's pants get torn off, but his genitals also got stuck inside the belt's mechanism. To prevent any further damage, the entire belt was sawed off by paramedics, and the man was taken to the hospital. All the while, the machine was still attached to his genitals. Later, at the hospital, it was removed under safer conditions. The victim received several lacerations on his damaged goods, but thankfully there was no permanent damage done. His condition stabilized throughout the following day, and he was shortly discharged from the hospital. The incident is under investigation by the Safe NSW department in Sydney, and it's expected the worker may get some sort of settlement out of this embarrassing and painful debacle. Number 1, woodchipper murder. On November 19, 1986, a 39-year-old Danish flight attendant named Helle Crafts was supposed to meet her in-laws in Newtown, Connecticut with her husband, Eastern Airlines pilot Richard Crafts. But when Richard got to his sister's house, Helle was nowhere to be seen. He came up with all sorts of excuses for her absence, but after weeks had passed and no one had heard from her, friends started to worry for her well-being. Richard was known for having anger management problems, and the way he was brushing off his wife's sudden disappearance worried the couple's loved ones even more. On December 1st of that year, Keith Mayo, a private investigator that had been hired by Helle before the disappearance, reported her as a missing person. Helle hired Mayo because she believed her husband was having an affair. The investigator not only managed to confirm her suspicions, but he also captured picture evidence of Richard kissing another woman. Mayo worked closely with the police to investigate Richard's behavior, and eventually the cops managed to get warrants to search his house, call logs, and credit card information. They found out that Richard had purchased a chainsaw, freezer, and had rented out a wood chipper a day before Helle disappeared. They did not find any of these items inside his house, but after some searching, police managed to locate a chainsaw inside a frozen lake near Richard's home. The chainsaw contained traces of blood that was the same type as Helle's. After some interviews, a nearby snowplower confirmed that he witnessed Richard using the wood chipper during a snowstorm on November 19th, the day Helle had gone missing. He pinpointed the exact location Richard was seen using the machine, and there, police found pieces of metal, wood, and sprinkled among them were the remains of Helle Crafts. The investigation determined that she had been chopped up by the chainsaw and then put through a wood chipper to hide the murder evidence. In 1988, Richard Crafts was convicted of murder by Connecticut courts. It was the first murder conviction in the state's history without the presence of a human body. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, although he was released early in 2020. Thanks for watching. Which of these events was the worst in your opinion? What's the most dangerous power tool you've ever used? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.